Hi. I want to talk again about an orientation that is important to relativistic skepticism. And I'm not saying that this is just characteristic of me. Actually, you know, in the criticism, thanks for the responses on becoming versus being. And on the criticism that my ideas that I present are from some other philosophy, you know, I'm fine with that. I have decided for this that mostly I'm not going to give attribution. If we want to have a scholarly conversation, you know, we can do that, and I can respond to videos and even make some videos like that. But there is an alternate criticism to the one of saying that an idea is borrowed from somewhere, which is when you attribute, people say you mischaracterize the idea in that other person's philosophy. I am primarily interested in describing relativistic skepticism. So the ideas are my own, and they are adopted. Now, I'll say really shortly, and I've written about this before, but there was a point in time when I was young, and I had believed I had invented a new philosophy. And I found out that I had just rediscovered a philosophy that was seeded out there and put into the culture, and was successful and at certain kinds of knowledge, at acquiring and building certain kinds of knowledge. And I had abstracted out what had been put in there consciously by ancient philosophers such as Pyrrho, my namesake. So that turns out to be sort of an underhanded compliment in a way, if you want to recognize the ideas. Anyway, the idea today I want to talk about is objectivity and subjectivity. Objectivity and subjectivity. I was thinking earlier maybe there should be something called subjectivity, but that's another issue. Objectivity versus subjectivity. The thing is, all right, my side of philosophy, the skeptical and relativistic side, is considered, you know, the subjective side, the subjectivist side, because we argue that there should be that there's subjective truth, that things can be true subjectively, which implies and means that, you know, what's true for one person isn't necessarily true for another person. Okay, this is in contrast to, for example, dogmatists, who say that knowledge can be known, absolutely, and there's one truth, and subjective truth is by definition, you know, partial and has an error to it. And that's where it gets interesting, because the dogmatists admit, and the objectivists, the people that believe in an objective reality primarily, they admit that there is subjectivity, and they admit that it has an element of error to it, which is what the subjectivists are talking about. We believe there's an element of error in all knowledge. All knowledge is theory. All truth is theory, which involves a certain bit of a potential for, you know, not telling the whole story, because it's subjective. Now, we admit there's an objective world. I mean, you know, we live, you can see from our behavior, even if you take an extreme skeptic that, you know, which some have, as, you know, adopted the, well, no, even the grocery store isn't real. They still go shopping. You can look at their behavior and see that they act in accordance with the appearance that there is a real world. So we admit the objective world, because it does appear that there is an objective, consistent world, and I rely on that every moment of every day. So we subjectivists admit there's an objective world, and objectivists admit there's a subjective world. So what's the difference? Why is there even a difference? Well, the difference is that when you have two ideas like this, both which pertain in a particular context, when you're talking about particular kinds of questions or problems or areas of knowledge about the world, you know, subjective versus objective, they do apply in their certain areas. And the question becomes, And this is analogous to how we build rights. Okay. We place one as the foundation and the other as the conclusion. So you can draw a conclusion of one thing from another thing. So for example, to just touch on the rights idea, you can argue that human rights are a basic right. People just have them. You just agree or you disagree, and then you can draw from that the conclusion that people should have property rights, right? Because as a human right, in order to have any security in your life and pursuit of happiness, you require a property right pretty much day one. I mean, even before you get food and sustenance, so that there's an acknowledged right, in terms of the principles of the matter. On the other hand, the libertarians have chosen to assume that your property right is the God-given right, so to speak, whether you believe in God or not, but it's the right that you agree or not, and you grant this right as fundamental. And you, they say, can draw human rights from that because of your ownership of your human body and things like this. You can do it either way. And there is a difference, though, as well. And one appeals or doesn't appeal because they do have subtle differences. And it's the same way with objectivity and subjectivity. So the skeptics are merely those who say there's a subjective reality, and that we conclude and realize there is an objective model based on subjective facts. Ultimately, the basic fact we assume is a subjective reality, and depending on how good you are at it, you might create a model of the objective world that's good enough or better or the best or really wonderful, or who knows. A lot of different models can be created. And I think that the dogmatist, the objectivist, is assuming an objective world and explains the subjectivity in terms of the objective world. They say, well, the person is having an appearance because there's light in the objective world and everything's really in the objective world. The problem is, since they don't have actual direct access to this, they are modeling the objective world. They've made a foundation out of an idea that they've had. They explain their perceptions as coming from the objective world, which does appear to be the case to me as well. However, that ignores the fact that the world they're really perceiving is primarily subjective. And the sense in which it's primarily subjective, I'll just finish up, and I hope it's not too long, is everything around us is an illusion. All right? But you say, it's really there. But it's still an illusion. What if you were unfortunately stricken blind, and you're sitting in your apartment, which you know really well, after you get home from the hospital, nobody's been back there, and you're sitting in there, and your friend is there with you, and you ask your friend to describe the apartment to you. In your eyes, you're blind, so you can't see, and he is describing the apartment to you. And you get a really good picture of what your apartment looks like. And you're in your apartment, and you know where you're sitting in your favorite chair, and you know which way it's pointed. And it's as if you're in that apartment, and you can see it, because your memory, it becomes vivid from the description. That's an illusion. You actually are in your apartment, and it really does look the way you think it looks. But it's still an illusion because it's created by the brain. And every 3D thing in our perception is created by the brain. We actually have two-dimensional pictures, and we do image processing and create a model of a 3D space that we feel we're in. And it's really, it's a virtual reality recreated from our sense input, which is limited. And when we were back in our evolution and we were even more limited in our senses, we had even less of an accurate model. And there's no doubt more accurate of a model to create in the future. Therefore, that's why we choose the subjective foundation. That's going to remain the case, that we are getting our subjective perception from sense perception. That will remain the case. But the object level, the objective world, that is in flux. That requires progress to get a better and better view